In an era full of experimental titles, Katamari Damacy hails as one of the prodigal sons of the 6th generation of gaming. Even if you never played one of the games, you have to at the very least heard of the series or seen it in passing. It's a little simple game in concept, but it tickled that ADHD stem in my brain that really wanted to see a tiny object and to turn into a big object, you know? The game in general is just really satisfying to play and, observe, kind of like playing with like a fidget spinner or slime. It's hard to like describe in words, but when you play it for yourself, you'll know what I mean, basically. The game, of course, is just one of many. It ended up spawning a series of games, merchandise, all that jazz, but I just want to talk about the first game here. Hi, I'm Ash, and I'm gonna spend the next however many minutes long this video ends up being gushing about this game that I love. I want to talk about the history of the game, the circumstance surrounding its release, and all that stuff basically. I love researching this sort of thing, and I think learning more about a game's development history ends up leading to me have a better understanding and appreciation for the games I play. So let's set the scene a little bit. Different eras of gaming are often defined by one or two dominating traits. For example, with the PS3, 360 era, many games were defined by their gritty tone and color palette, featuring grays and browns in contrast to the bright colors of the previous generations. You can really tell just by comparing box art for games of this generation compared to the previous ones. Back then, you would have little scrimblos, little guys running around on colorful backgrounds, but nowadays you would have realistic CG render of a dude looking grim, looking sadly as he, wields a weapon over his shoulder. He's looking down, he's not really happy about what he has to do, but he gotta do it anyways. Video games often went for a darker or realistic tone in order to appeal to a growing audience, and this wasn't just limited to Western titles. Look at games like Sonic 06, or hell, look at games like Bomberman Zero, where they decided to take this cute little baby guy and bimbify him into this hellish battle royale situation. Wind Waker, nah, that was a game for babies, but Twilight Princess, ooh, that's the one that I want to play. Yeah, let's give Link a gun. Yeah, let's give him a $20 game that comes with a piece of plastic that's only used for this game and maybe a couple of hunting games. It's really unfortunate because I think I speak for myself and a lot of people where we say, yeah, we'd much rather have games look like Mega Man Legends instead of Too Human, for example. With the increased online capabilities of the PS3 and 360, now more than ever that people want to play video games with their buds across the country, across the state, across the world. Having a realistic shooting game to play with a friend like Modern Warfare might have seemed more appealing to mainstream gamers than a little baby platform, Little Big Planet, for instance. Please don't take that personally, I love Little Big Planet, just for the record. But yeah, during that generation of gaming, we would have games try to aim for a more cinematic approach, and you'd end up getting titles like, let's see here, The Last of Us, The Last of Us Again, The Last of Us Part 2, The Last of Us Again, and many other games styling themselves after film in terms of cinematography, storytelling, and characters. And like, look, it's fine for game devs to want to model their games after film, and for the players to make them feel as though they're playing through a film. I'd be a massive hypocrite if I ragged on games like that, I'm gonna be honest with y'all, because Metal Gear Solid is one of my favorite franchises, but after a while these games sort of mesh together in my mind, and they lose their overall individuality in my opinion. Part of what makes the 6th generation of gaming so special to me was the amount of risk and diversity found in games. These games were often made on a shoestring budget by people who had a story they wanted to tell or an idea they wanted to convey. And look, not all these games were 10 out of 10 bangers, but I'll always commend the developers for going against the norm and trying something different. I feel this era of gaming is when developers decided to put out their dream projects, taking risks and being experimental. When I talk about this topic with my friends, I usually bring up how Nintendo behaved during this era. Look back at the games they released for the GameCube during this time. Wind Waker, Mario Sunshine, and Metroid Prime were all so radically different compared to previous games in their respective franchises. But nowadays, it seems as though the company is kind of coasting along, playing these franchises relatively safe. Though I do gotta give them credit for going outside their comfort zone with more recent games. I love Mario Odyssey, it's my personal favorite 3D title, but you gotta admit, there's something special that, truly unique about Mario Sunshine that makes it stand out in my mind, even if currently I'm really just not too big on it. Companies like Sega would end up releasing pretty wacky titles too during this era, like the original Yakuza, Jet Set Radio Future, Billy Hatcher, and more. Sony had their share of titles too, with bangers such as Eco, Ape Escape, and Parappa. Hell, even Microsoft tried with titles like Blinks. I never played it, but they're trying something new here. I gotta commend them for that. Lesser, more indie devs had their own hand at producing titles, like Love the Sack, creating crazy unique titles like Tulip and Rule of Rose. Love those titles. You had Suda51 and his boyfriend Shinji Mikami working on Killer 7, which is a game I think everyone should play, even if it can be a little hard to get through at times. Wonderful game that one is. And of course, while Namco was pumping out, your Pac-Mans and your Tales of titles, they were also willing to pump out experimental titles, such as Katamari, My Beloved. Katamari was conceived by Keita Takahashi, a student of Musashi no Art University in Tokyo. He studied sculpting while he was there, but decided upon graduation that he would rather focus his efforts on video games as they would provide an interactive edge to his art that wouldn't be possible otherwise. Calling back to Suda again, it kind of reminds me of how Suda51 went from an undertaker to a game developer. I mean, just because you go to college for something or you work in a profession for a period of your time, doesn't mean that's what you're always going to be doing for the rest of your life, basically. Takahashi would join Namco in 1999, pitching a variety of titles that would all end up being shot down sadly. The first title was Action Drive, heavily inspired by Crazy Taxi. Funnily enough, it would be this kind of Crazy Taxi knockoff where Takahashi would introduce the familiar characters of the Prince, the King of all Cosmos, and the Queen. And this would also be where their personalities would first come to light. Here, the Queen would be kidnapped, and the King, lazy to do any real work himself, would send the poor little Prince to go rescue her. It would have utilized the funky head shape of the Prince to get up to various antics, but the game's development didn't last too long. Another title was known as Densen, the Japanese word for power line, in which players would take control of a girl as she traveled across power lines. It was basically the sequel to Serial Experiment Lane that we all deserve. Not counting, the little PS1 game where she goes to therapy. Another prototype was called Tamako Rogashi, a game based on an activity played by Japanese schoolchildren during undokai, or sports days. The game basically involved rolling around a larger ball in hopes of reaching a goal, which in retrospect is pretty similar to Katamari when you look at it. Densen and Tamako Rogashi were based in reality, and they both ended up inspiring Takahashi to further pursue games based in the vein of turning something ordinary into something witty and meaningful. After consulting with a friend at Namco, Takahashi would come to the conclusion that making a simple game about rolling things up in a ball could actually be really fun. Not only that, but it gave him an opportunity to reuse the earlier characters he created, the Prince and his family. There was one problem though. Takahashi worked in the art department of Namco, not game design, so proposing a title to the higher ups would prove to be tricky. However, his friend Mitsutoshi Ozaki had a rather interesting proposition that would work in Takahashi's favor. At the time, Namco was in charge of the Digital Hollywood Game Laboratory, a school that sought out young game developers and helped kindle their love for the genre. From there, students would learn all sorts of tips and tricks of the trade that could eventually be used to make actual games. Ozaki suggested to Takahashi, hey, take part in one of the courses offered by the school, utilize the work of the students, and help develop your game. So, following the words of Ozaki, and armed with a group of 10 students, a few Namco employees that were set to be laid off, and 100 million yen, Takahashi began work on the title that would be known as Katamari Damacy. Fun thing, the name of the game comes from the Japanese word katamari, meaning clump, and damashi, being used instead of tamashi, meaning spirit. The name of the game literally translates to clump god, and I wouldn't want it any other way. The game itself entered full-time development in late 2001, with the game being released in early 2004. A few ideas were thrown around during the development of the title. One such idea was that the Katamari should have been able to grow smaller in addition to growing much larger. To accompany this feature, the dev team considered having a dynamical musical score that would change depending on the size of the Katamari, and it was a novel concept for the time, but after some playtesting, they figured it'd be disheartening to shrink your Katamari and have the music be dumbed down as a result. I do gotta say though, Takahashi has to be commended for sticking to his guns about the game. as throughout the development of Katamari, Namco would try to, butt heads with him, pester him for changes, or make the game more complex. But he had 4 defining principles in which he abided to during the development of the title: novelty, ease of understanding, enjoyment, and humor. He wanted players to feel similar emotions to when booting up Pac-Man for the first time. Being able to start the game and think, I know what I gotta do. You see this funky little yellow circle, man, and a bunch of dots, and your monkey brain is telling you, I must eat. So with Katamari, you see a goofy little green boy behind a strange orb, and your mind tells you, bigger. It's the simplest things in life that drive us, but if they're fun, it's fine with me. And that mentality is really present from the moment you actually turn on the game. You boot it up, and you're greeted with this cute little file select screen, where the different save slots are represented by different parts of the Namco logo. The option to delete a save is indicated by the little trademark symbol, which is also really cute. There's an acoustic rendition of the Katamari theme playing, really getting you into the zone. From the menu select screen alone, you're introduced to the kind of funky control scheme of the game, where you gotta move both sticks in the direction of the file that you want to choose. You roll up your file, you get to hear that acoustic theme now in full force.
Katamari Damacy.
So, after a little tutorial, you're given a bit more context as to who exactly your little skrunkly is and what exactly your goal is. Your father is the king of all cosmos, and he completely got wasted and destroyed all the stars in the sky, and the moon. So, it's up to you, the cute little prince, to clean up the mess caused by your parents. You guys ever noticed that the king looks like Freddie Mercury? I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone knows that, and it's intentional, so he's based on Freddie. Kinda like Soul Bad Guy from Guilty Gear. I guess that makes Kai the prince, which makes sense given the relationship. It's all abusive one way or another. Anyways, everything you roll up sticks to your Katamari, which turns into a star once the allotted time is up. That means all creatures and objects, living or not, have the potential to become a star, which may be a metaphor if you think about it hard enough. At the end of the stage, you return to the king and he evaluates your performance based on the size of the Katamari, the amount/types of objects you picked up, the speed in which you made his request size, and, things like that. Afterwards, you watch as the king launches your star into the sky, with a fitting name to boot. And once that's over, a cutscene typically plays out of a Japanese schoolgirl and her family, with the cutscene sometimes relating to the activities of the prince. Other times, it's something completely unrelated, but they're cute and charming in their own right. I love seeing them. The little story arc ends up culminating with the patriarch of the family going to space and being absorbed into the Katamari. Or the moon. Or both. It ends up being both. The models of the family are cute and blocky, and the same could be said for really all the models in the game. Katamari uses this beautiful low poly aesthetic, and it's one of my favorite things about the game. All the creatures and objects have this polygonal, rough feel to them, from the tiniest of thumbtacks to the biggest of islands, and it really adds to the game's charm and makes it look great, even today in 2022. Speaking of, the prince is like this cute little guy. He doesn't say anything throughout the entire game, but I just love the expressions he would make as you roll around. From his strained expression when you're trying to climb up a cliff, to his cute little smile as he roams around the planet. The prince is simple in design, but it always makes me happy, and hell, even when you're underwater, he puts on a cute little snorkel. It's a really minor change, but I kinda don't like the prince's design in later Katamari games. I'm just not a big fan of the face. It's very minor, of course, and I'm sure, people can, like what they like. But personally, I just love his beady little expression in the first game. It's top tier. I love this little guy. While you're out and about, you can pick up these little gifts too that your parents leave behind, and you can customize how your prince looks. These are purely cosmetic, and it's nice to think that the king and queen are looking out for the prince. Sometimes. Though, to be completely honest, the in-game reasoning behind the gifts is that the king and queen go out to vacation in different countries and pick up these gifts for the prince. Then they kind of drop them and they feel too lazy to pick it up, so they just go tell the prince, hey, you're down there anyways, go pick it up. I usually have the prince wear a little crown though, it makes him look dapper, like, you know, he's ready to seize the day. I like it. The game doesn't really hold your hand for the most part, and I like that a lot. You're dumped into a random starting point in this undisclosed Japanese city, have a task of getting your Katamari to be as big as a certain threshold, and given a time limit, and off you go. The game itself only has 3 levels, labeled House, City, and World, but the scope of the levels vary, and there's enough unique about each level to make each one stand out in my mind. And in all honesty, I always found the smaller scale missions to be the most fun. When you get to the levels where you're rolling up skyscrapers and islands, you kind of mentally check out and go, alright, yeah, okay, just scooped up some Ultraman, alright, scooped up some gods, alright, I'm good. But with the tinier stages, I really feel powerful when I go from rolling up thumbtacks to finally being able to, like, pick up trading cards, ooh. Once the Katamari gets big enough, you can't really see the prince anymore, which makes sense of course, but I love seeing this little dude push around his Katamari. Not all the missions are about making the Katamari as big as possible though, and some missions do change it up, where instead of trying to get it as big as possible during a time limit, it instead asks you with picking up many objects of the same theme. This applies primarily to the various Zodiac challenges that you can undertake, with the theme of the challenge pertaining to the mythos and origin of the Zodiac. For example, the level involving recreating Virgo means picking up as many girls as you can. But not all of them are that nice, sadly. There are some that are just flat out mean. And I'm pretty sure people who play Katamari know what I'm talking about when I bring up ones such as the Cow one or Ursa Major, where basically you are tasked with picking up a single object. So, for example, the Taurus level has you picking up the largest cow you can find. Thing is, that includes all the cow themed objects as well. So, anything with a cow print in that level, fair game. So you gotta maneuver your Katamari around tight spaces and try to make your Katamari bigger while also avoiding all the little tiny cow merchandise. The Ursa Major level is just like that. Like, no, seriously, here, look. There's one level where you're tasked with creating the North Star, but you're not given an indicator of how long your Katamari is. You basically have to make it as close as 10 meters tall as possible, with the caveat being, you have no idea how large your Katamari is. It becomes easier to overshoot than undershoot this limit because as your Katamari gets bigger, it gets more and more easier to pick up larger objects, making your Katamari larger, and you pick up larger objects, and it just repeats over and over. I always end up chickening out and making a Katamari that's under the limit, but I'd much rather deal with a small scolding from the king than what happens when you overshoot. Like I said earlier, I love the missions where you're straight up rolling up mountains and islands, but I still think the earlier missions are my favorite portion. It really is a simple but satisfying process of collecting small objects in your little ball and rolling slowly and steadily. And hell, I mean, the shorter time limits of the earlier stages ends up making it like a blast to replay, even from the very beginning of the game. For the sake of the video, I ended up going back to an old incomplete save file and recorded footage from there, after accidentally deleting my original save file. And it only took me an hour to beat the game from there, and I just had a great time throughout. In general, I feel that like as I've gotten older, I found myself preferring shorter games with more replay value rather than longer games filled with bloat. The game itself is relatively short and easily beaten in an afternoon, but it has great replay value and none of the missions ever feel like they overstay their welcome and none of them feel like chores either. Like look, don't get me wrong, I love long titles like Red Dead Redemption 2 or Xenoblade, but I'll be dead in the ground before I replay those games. I feel that titles like Sonic Mania and Resi 2 are really up my alley, relatively short and compact adventures that have a lot of content that makes it really fun to replay. Like look, you could beat Sonic Mania in a day, but I still somehow got 300 hours in it. Hell, I mean, I even used to hold world records in it. Well, anyways, in regards to Katamari, it definitely has an arcadey feel with its time limits and small stages, and I think that style is perfectly translated onto the Switch. The levels start out small in scope and with short time limits, and they gradually increase size and theme, but even the 25-minute long missions feel short. You get the game on PC and PS4, but there's something really cozy about warming up under the blanket while playing Katamari on your Switch. You can just hop on and play levels on your commute to work or school, which I think is a great part about the Switch. Look, I mean, the console is powered by hopes and dreams, but at the very least, simple games like Katamari run flawlessly on this little toaster. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the cousins for a little bit. I did not record myself playing through this 2-player option, or the 2-player mode in the game, but I just want to show off these cousins because they are so cute. I love their designs. I think Johnson here is my favorite. And all of them are just adorable, and I would love to collect plushies or pins of them all. Also, real quick, I just want to bring up the collectible screens again, because I just love when games have meaningless things like this. And hell, I don't even want to call it meaningless, because whoever wrote these descriptions seem to be having fun, and I'm just having a blast reading through them. Like, look, they like categorize these characters in name and size and shapes and whatever, and you can rotate the models around and watch them freak out. Oh, and I also talked about this before, but I love the OST of this game. The soundtrack gets you grooving as you're doing your silly little tasks. It combines all sorts of genres, from jazz to electronic to chiptune to samba, all to get your little prince feet running around trying to impress your dad. Yu Miyake served as the sound director and composed 7 of the tracks of the game, but there were many more people involved in production of the OST. It's really weird, but funny, like, it suits the game, because Miyake has gone on record saying that the artists chosen for Katamari were, quote, well-known Japanese singers that everyone knew but no one heard from in a while, for some reason. Takahashi himself, hands off in regards to the sound department, letting Miyake and his team go hog wild. As a result, it just makes the game and the soundtrack just feel genuine as a whole, if that makes sense, you know? It doesn't just feel like the game was trying too hard to be quirky or whatever, instead it was just being itself, and it really reflects in the gameplay, the OST, and the general production of the game. I think people like fail to realize that like video games are often like a sum of their parts, and it's honestly pretty easy to forget that nowadays, and I don't really blame you. Because like when you see companies like Activision or Ubisoft pump out games at the same franchise yearly, it's easy to kind of see game devs as just autonomous machines. But you gotta remember that there's like actual human beings behind the production of pretty much everything that you guys play. I think another problem is that people often just herald directors around like they're the only ones running the show, and that's not true either, you know? It's like I said earlier, games are a sum of their parts, and they have teams of dozens of hundreds of people all working together to make the product that you end up enjoying at home. And like, look, I adore Japanese game directors like Kojima, Suda51, Yoko Taro, and many more, but I don't think it's fair for all the other game developers working on their games when you just credit the director as the one in charge of everything. And going back to Katamari, Takahashi was, obviously a huge part of what made Katamari successful, but you also gotta give credit to all the programmers and devs involved in the process. Like, sure, I named Miyake, but he was just in charge of the music, and I'm only scratching the surface of all the people involved in the production of this game. And I think games like Katamari are my favorite, where, not necessarily like, puzzle games are my favorite, but games where you can feel all the devs are working together in order to make a unified, memorable experience. And of course, that isn't to say that games nowadays aren't being made with the same love and care. A more recent example I could think of is the 2022 remake of Live Alive. That game feels like everyone involved in the production was just having a great time. Not just the graphic designers, the composers, and developers, but hell, even the voice actors too. Video games are products meant for entertainment, but I always like to be reminded that these were created by living, breathing human beings. It helps establish a much more personal connection with the game, and it makes me enjoy them a lot more. I know soul is a term thrown around a lot when it comes to media, and is something whose definition will differ from person to person, but I think we can all agree Katamari Damacy has had so much love and soul poured into every aspect of the game, and that's part of the reason why the game holds up to this very day. Takahashi and everyone at Namco really captured lightning in a bottle with this game, and I'm forever thankful for everyone involved for creating such a wonderful title. I know there's other games in the series, I talked about it before. I think I only played We Love Katamari and a little bit of the one on the Vita, but I still think the first one is my all-time favorite in terms of the games in the series. I love the game a lot, and I hope after listening to me ramble for 20-something odd minutes, you have a little more appreciation for the game, or at the very least, you now know more about the game than you did before clicking on this video. So, that's the end of the video. I ended up talking a lot more about the history of the game than the game itself, but hopefully you guys don't mind. This is a video that I've wanted to make since this game came out in December of 2018, but I've always put it off for one reason or another. I just really couldn't put words as to why. It was really laziness, it was, I don't know, something else eating away at me. The world's a scary place right now. I'm 24 and I'm in my last semester of graduate school. I'm studying cybersecurity and I'm having serious doubts about my choice in career and my future as a whole, as well as, where my passions lie. But at the very least, I know that I am passionate and love video games, and at the very least, I can make videos about them and talk about them and share them with you guys, and hopefully you guys enjoy them as well. Who knows? I had a lot of fun recording this video and doing research for it, and hey, maybe in the future I can look back on this video with pride. But no one really knows what the future has in store for any of us, really. At the very least, I know we just gotta keep rolling. Yeah, Lonely Rolling Stall, yeah, it's corny, but thank you guys all so much for watching, and take care.